My doctor looked me dead in the eyes and told me I had 6 months left to live. I trusted him with everything, my health, my family's future, only to find out it was all a lie. Now, he's the one facing the consequences. My name's Frank, I'm 69 years old, and I've spent my life working hard, raising 2 kids, and trying to be a good husband to my wife, Linda. But last year, I got hit with a betrayal that shook me to my core. This is the story of how the guy I thought was my doctor, a man I'd known for decades, made up a story about my health to make money, and how I fought back to make him pay. Before I go any further, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're listening from. It's great to see how far these stories travel. It all started last April with a regular checkup at my doctor's office in Springfield. Dr. Richard Hayes had been my doc for over 30 years. He was the kind of guy who'd ask about your grandkids, remember your fishing stories, and make you feel like you were in good hands. He patched me up after a heart scare a while back, delivered my daughter, Sarah, even showed up to my son Mike's high school graduation party with a six-pack and a grin. So when I walked into his office for my yearly physical, I wasn't sweating it. I felt fine, maybe a bit stiff getting out of bed, but nothing a guy my age doesn't deal with. A week later, I got a call from Dr. Hayes. "Frank, we need to talk about your test results. Can you come in tomorrow?" His voice was heavy, like he was carrying bad news. My gut twisted. I told Linda, and she tried to play it cool, saying it was probably just a precaution. But her eyes said she was scared, and so was I. The next day, we sat in his office, his desk piled with charts, walls covered in diplomas and smiling family photos. Dr. Hayes leaned forward, his face grim. "Frank, I'm really sorry, but your tests show pancreatic cancer, stage 4. It's spread, and we're looking at maybe 6 months, a year at most with treatment." It felt like the air got sucked out of the room. Linda grabbed my hand, tears running down her face. I just sat there numb, trying to process it. Cancer. Terminal, me. I asked how this could happen. I didn't feel sick. No pain, no weight loss, nothing. He talked about how some cancers hide, showed me graphs with numbers I couldn't make sense of, and said he'd set me up with an oncologist for chemo and radiation. He handed me a thick folder of papers and said, "We'll fight this, Frank." But something about his tone, the way he wouldn't look me straight in the eye, felt wrong. That night I sat in my recliner, staring at the TV, not really watching. Linda was on the phone with our kids, her voice cracking as she told them I was dying. Mike booked a flight from Denver. Sarah packed up her kids and drove from St. Louis. We were all in a daze, planning my last days like it was set in stone. I started writing a will, figuring out how to stretch our savings for Linda, even scribbling letters for my grandkids to open when they're older. But the whole time, something nagged at me. I'd always been healthy. Sure, I liked my burgers and a cold beer now and then, but I walked every morning, kept my weight steady, and felt good. How could I have stage 4 cancer with no warning? I started poking around online, looking up pancreatic cancer, symptoms like yellow skin, dropping pounds, back pain. I didn't have any of that. The more I read, the more it didn't add up. I told Linda I wanted another opinion. She wasn't sure. She'd always trusted Dr. Hayes, but I wasn't backing down. I got an appointment with Dr. Emily Larson, a top oncologist in Kansas City. I brought every scrap of paper Dr. Hayes gave me, test results, scans, the works. Dr. Larson spent hours going over them, then ordered new blood work and imaging. When she called me back, her voice was calm but puzzled. "Frank, I don't see any cancer. Your pancreas is fine. Your tests are clean. Who told you you were sick?" My head was spinning. No cancer. I showed her the folder from Dr. Hayes, and her face tightened. "These don't match the originals in the lab system. Something's fishy here." She said she'd dig deeper, and that's when it hit me. Dr. Hayes had lied to me. My relief at being healthy was drowned out by a burning anger. This guy had put me and my family through hell, made us think I was a goner. For what? I started asking questions, calling the lab that ran my tests, talking to nurses who worked with Hayes. One nurse, who wouldn't give her name, let something slip. She said he'd been pushing pricey treatments on folks for years, treatments they didn't need. My blood boiled. This wasn't a mistake. This was a scam, and I wasn't the only one he'd hurt. I knew right then I had to stop him, no matter what it took. I was still reeling from the news that I didn't have cancer, but the relief didn't last long. Anger took over, hot and heavy, because Dr. Richard Hayes, the guy I'd trusted for 30 years, had lied to my face, made my family think I was dying, all for what? Money. I couldn't let it go. My name's Frank, and this is how I started digging to uncover the truth about my doctor's scam and make sure he'd never hurt anyone else. After Dr. Emily Larson in Kansas City told me my real tests were clean, I knew I had to find out why Hayes faked my diagnosis. I wasn't just mad for me. I kept thinking about Linda, crying her eyes out, my kids dropping everything to be with me, my grandkids asking why Grandpa was sick. That's what kept me up at night, pushing me to do something. I started with the lab that ran my tests, Midwest Diagnostics. I called them up, keeping it casual, saying I was checking on my results. Got a tech named Jenny on the line. She was nice at first, confirming my blood work and scans showed no problems. But when I brought up the fake results Dr. Hayes showed me, she got real quiet. "You're not the only one asking about him," she said, her voice low. That stopped me cold. Not the only one. I pushed a little, but Jenny wouldn't talk more over the phone. She agreed to meet me at a diner just outside Springfield, one of those old-school places with greasy coffee and vinyl booths. She showed up looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, checking the door every few seconds. Over a couple of mugs, she spilled it. "I could lose my job for this, Frank, but Hayes has been pulling this for years. He gets paid by clinics to send patients for treatments, chemo, radiation, stuff they don't need. He messes with their results to scare them into it." My jaw hit the floor. A scam preying on folks' worst fears. Jenny said she'd seen dozens of cases like mine, people with fake diagnoses, forking over thousands for nothing. She didn't have hard proof, but she pointed me to a nurse named Carla who used to work for Hayes. Said she might know more. Finding Carla was like chasing a ghost. She'd quit his practice and moved to a small town an hour away, wanting nothing to do with him. I tracked her down through a buddy who knew her cousin, drove out to her place, a little house with a sagging porch. Carla was in her 50s, tough as nails but with eyes that looked like they'd seen too much. We sat at her kitchen table and she didn't sugarcoat it. "Hayes was a snake," she said, sipping her coffee. "He'd target older folks, people like you who trusted him. Fake test results, push treatments, then split the profits with a shady clinic in Springfield. I walked away when I saw a widow in her 80s get billed $50,000 for chemo she didn't need. I felt sick, picturing that poor woman. Carla had kept some records, emails, billing codes, test results that didn't add up. She handed me a USB drive saying, "This is all I've got, but be careful. Hayes has friends in high places." I drove home with that drive in my pocket, feeling like I was holding a loaded gun. That night, Linda and I sat at our dining table going through Carla's files. There were names I recognized: Mr. Thompson, who died after months of chemo; Mrs. Rivera, who sold her house to pay medical bills. It hit me hard, thinking how many lives Hayes had turned upside down. But those files alone wouldn't take him down. I needed more. I started calling folks from Carla's list, using old phone books and church directories. Most didn't want to talk, too scared or ashamed, but a few opened up. Joe, a 72-year-old retired mechanic, said Hayes told him he had lung cancer a few years back. A second opinion cleared him, but not before he'd spent $30,000 on treatments. Then there was Betty, whose husband passed away thinking he had cancer when he didn't. Their stories tore at me like I was carrying their pain too. This wasn't just my fight anymore. I started watching Hayes, nothing crazy, just keeping an eye on him. I'd drive by his office, see who he was meeting. One day, I saw him at a fancy steakhouse with a guy in a slick suit. Asked around and found out the guy was a rep from Springfield Wellness Center, the clinic Carla mentioned. I snapped some photos, wrote down license plates, anything that might help. Linda worried I was getting too deep, but she'd sit with me, going over my notes, saying, "Just don't get yourself in trouble, Frank." I promised her I'd be smart. I reached out to an old friend, Tom, a lawyer who'd handled some medical cases. Showed him Carla's files, Joe's story, Betty's records. His eyes got wide. "Frank, this is huge. If we can prove this, Hayes is toast. License gone, maybe even jail." Tom took the case for free but said we needed more than files. He suggested hiring a private investigator to dig into Hayes' money, bank accounts, payments from the clinic. It wasn't cheap, but Linda and I dipped into our savings. This was worth it. The pie, Ray, was a rough-around-the-edges guy who didn't mess around. He found offshore accounts, shady transfers, proof Hayes was living like a king, lake house, new Cadillac, trips to the Bahamas, all on a small-town doc salary. Ray also got emails between Hayes and the clinic rep, talking about patient quotas and profit splits. It was disgusting, but it wasn't enough to end him. I wanted Hayes to slip up, to say something we could use. So I came up with a plan, risky but necessary. I booked an appointment with him, saying I was following up on my cancer. Tom got me a hidden recorder, legal in Missouri if one person knows it's running. Walking into Hayes' office, my heart was pounding like a drum, but I kept my cool. He greeted me with that fake smile, asking how I was feeling. I played along, then started poking. "Doc, I'm confused." Another doctor said my tests look fine. "What's going on?" His smile slipped and I saw sweat on his forehead. "Probably a mix-up," he said, shuffling papers. I kept at it, mentioning the lab, the discrepancies. He got rattled, stumbling over his words, not admitting anything outright but saying enough to sound guilty. I left that office knowing we had him on the ropes. I had Dr. Richard Hayes cornered. That recording from his office, with his shaky voice dodging my questions, was like a loaded gun in my hand. But this wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all the folks he'd hurt, the lives he'd wrecked with his lies. My name's Frank, 69 years old, and this is how I brought down the doctor who faked my cancer diagnosis and scammed who knows how many others. With that recording burning a hole in my pocket, I met my lawyer friend Tom at his office in Springfield. I played him the tape and he grinned like he just won the lottery. "Frank, this is dynamite," he said, rubbing his hands together. "Hayes is cooked. With this, Carla's files and Ray's financials, we've got him dead to rights." But Tom warned me it wouldn't be a cakewalk. Hayes had buddies on the hospital board, local bigwigs who'd vouch for him, and a reputation as the town's golden doc. Taking him down was gonna be a fight, but I was ready. I kept thinking about Joe, who'd shelled out $30,000 for fake lung cancer treatments. Betty, whose husband died believing he was sick. Mrs. Rivera, who lost her house to medical bills. This was for them, too. Tom brought in a medical fraud expert, Karen, who'd seen cases like this before. She tore through Carla's files, the USB drive from the nurse who quit Hayes' practice and found a gold mine, doctored lab reports, fake billing codes, even forged signatures on referrals. Karen laid it out plain. Hayes was running a classic scam. He'd fake diagnoses to scare patients, send them to Springfield Wellness Center for treatments, and pocket fat kickbacks. Ray, our private investigator, backed it up with bank records. Hayes was pulling in thousands per patient, stashing it in offshore accounts. Karen figured he'd made over $1 million in the last 5 years. It made my stomach churn, thinking how he'd smiled at me all those years, knowing he was bleeding people dry. We needed more victims to step up to make the case ironclad. Tom said we had to be careful. Hayes couldn't know we were coming for him. I started at my church, talking to folks I trusted, not naming names, just asking if anyone had odd experiences with Dr. Hayes. A few spoke up. My buddy Carl said his wife got a cancer scare from Hayes last year, but another doctor cleared her. Ed from the hardware store said his dad went through radiation for a tumor that wasn't there. Bit by bit, we got 8 victims willing to testify, plus a dozen more who shared records but were too scared to go public. Linda was my anchor, making calls, keeping me from losing it when I wanted to storm Hayes' office and give him a piece of my mind. She'd sit with me at night, sorting through evidence, saying, "We're doing this for everyone he hurt, Frank." Tom filed a complaint with the Missouri Medical Board and tipped off a reporter friend at the Springfield News-Leader. Karen helped us put together a lawsuit, not just for me but for all the victims, claiming fraud and emotional distress. The plan was to hit Hayes hard: legal action, board investigation, and public pressure. When the lawsuit hit, I felt like I could breathe again, but I was nervous too. What if Hayes' connections bailaid him out? What if we'd missed something? Then the newspaper dropped a bombshell. The headline screamed, "Springfield doctor accused of faking diagnoses for profit." It laid out everything: Carla's files, the bank records, my recording, though they kept my name out to protect me. The town lost its mind. People flooded the paper's phone lines, sharing their own stories about Hayes. The medical board launched a full investigation, and Springfield Wellness Center put out a statement saying they had no clue about the scam. Hayes' office turned into a ghost town, patients canceled, reporters camped out front, his sign half covered with a tarp. I drove by one day and felt a spark of satisfaction, but we weren't done yet. Tom got us a meeting with a medical board investigator, Paul, a straight shooter who didn't mess around. I played him the recording, and he scribbled notes like his pen was on fire. He said they'd pulled Hayes' patient records and found dozens of mismatches, fake diagnoses, unneeded treatments. Paul told us Hayes was lawyering up, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, but the evidence was stacking high. Then came the big day, a hearing with the medical board. Tom, Karen, and I showed up with our mountain of proof, joined by Joe, Betty, and Carl, who were brave enough to testify. Hayes was there looking like a shadow of himself, his fancy suit doing nothing to hide the sweat dripping down his neck. When they played my recording, you could feel the air shift. Hayes tried to spin it, saying I'd misheard him, but nobody was buying it. The board suspended his license right there, pending a full review. That night, Linda and I watched the news at home. The anchor said, "Doctor Richard Hayes was under investigation for medical fraud, with criminal charges on the horizon." Linda squeezed my hand, and for the first time in months I felt like we were winning. But I couldn't shake the worry that Hayes might still wiggle free. His money, his lawyers, his connections. I wasn't about to let him slip through the cracks. Dr. Richard Hayes was on the ropes, his medical license suspended, his reputation in tatters after the Springfield News-Leader exposed his scam. But I wasn't done yet. I'd fought too hard, carried the pain of too many people to let him slip away. My name's Frank, 69 years old, and this is how I made sure the doctor who faked my cancer diagnosis faced the full weight of justice, and how it changed me forever. With the medical board hearing behind us, I thought I'd feel relieved, but I couldn't shake the worry that Hayes might still dodge the consequences. His money, his lawyers, his connections, they could still save him. Tom, my lawyer friend, said we were close, but we needed to keep the pressure on. The Missouri Medical Board was digging through Hayes' records, and the stories pouring in from other victims were piling up like firewood. But I kept thinking about Joe, who'd lost $30,000 to fake treatments, Betty, whose husband died believing he was sick, and Mrs. Rivera, who gave up her home for nothing. Their faces stayed with me, pushing me to see this through. Tom got word that the district attorney was looking at criminal charges, fraud, maybe even manslaughter, since some patients had died under Hayes' care. The thought of him in handcuffs gave me a spark of hope, but I'd learned not to count my chickens. Linda, my wife, could see I was wound tight. She'd make me coffee, sit with me on our porch swing, and say, "Frank, you've done everything you can. Let the system do its job." But letting go wasn't my style, not after what we'd been through. I kept in touch with Paul, the medical board investigator, who was like a dog with a bone. He told me they'd found over 50 cases of falsified records in Hayes' files. Patients, mostly older folks, pushed into treatments they didn't need. Some had suffered side effects from chemo or radiation, their health ruined for no reason. Paul said the board was moving to revoke Hayes' license permanently, but it would take time. Meanwhile, the lawsuit we'd filed, representing me and the other victims, was gaining traction. Karen, our medical fraud expert, said we had a shot at millions in damages, not just for the money Hayes had scammed, but for the emotional toll. Nights like the ones I spent thinking I was dying, writing letters to my grandkids. Money wouldn't fix that pain, but it could help folks like Mrs. Rivera get back on their feet. Then came a break I didn't expect. A former receptionist from Hayes' office, Diane, reached out to Tom. She'd been quiet for years, scared of losing her job, but the newspaper article gave her courage. She had records, internal memos, emails between Hayes and Springfield Wellness Center, even a ledger showing kickbacks. Diane said she'd kept copies because she felt guilty watching patients get fleeced. Her evidence was the final nail in Hayes' coffin. Tom used it to push the DA for charges, and within weeks, the news hit. Dr. Richard Hayes was arrested for fraud and racketeering. I'll never forget seeing it on TV. Hayes in a cheap suit, hands cuffed, head down as they let him out of his fancy office. The anchor said the charges could mean up to 20 years in prison if convicted. Springfield was buzzing, folks talking at the diner, the barber shop, the church. Some couldn't believe it, others said they'd always thought Hayes was too slick. I drove by his office a few days later. The sign was gone, windows boarded up, a for lease notice taped to the door. It felt like a weight lifted off my chest, but it wasn't enough. I wanted to face him, to look him in the eye one last time. Tom arranged for me to attend his arraignment. I sat in the courtroom, Linda by my side, watching Hayes stand before the judge. He pleaded not guilty, but his voice was weak, nothing like the confident doc who'd lied to my face. When our eyes met, he looked away like he couldn't bear the sight of me. I didn't say a word, just stared, letting him feel the weight of what he'd done. The judge set a high bail, and Hayes' fancy friends weren't there to help. He spent that night in jail, and I slept better than I had in months. Over the next few weeks, the case grew bigger. More victims came forward, over 70 by the time the trial started. The medical board revoked Hayes' license for good, and the DA added charges for endangering patients. The trial was a circus, with news crews from St. Louis and Kansas City camped outside the courthouse. Joe, Betty, and Carl testified, their voices shaking but strong, telling stories that echoed mine. When it was my turn, I took the stand and laid it all out. How Hayes told me I was dying, how my family grieved, how I uncovered his lies. The jury looked horrified, and I saw one woman wipe away a tear. Hayes' lawyer tried to paint him as a victim of a mix-up, but with Diane's ledger, Ray's financials, and my recording, they didn't stand a chance. After a week of testimony, the jury came back with a verdict, guilty on all counts. Hayes got 15 years plus restitution to the victims. The courtroom erupted, folks hugging, crying. Linda squeezed my hand so hard I thought she'd break it. We won, but it didn't feel like a victory party. It was bittersweet, knowing how much pain he'd caused. Back home, I sat in my recliner, trying to make sense of it all. I'd started this fight for me, for my family, but it became something bigger, a fight for everyone Hayes had hurt. I thought about the nights I'd lain awake, thinking I was dying, the letters I'd written to my grandkids, the way Linda's eyes filled with tears. That pain wouldn't vanish, but knowing Hayes was behind bars, his career in ruins, gave me some peace. I started meeting with other victims, forming a support group at our church. We'd sit in the basement, drinking bad coffee, sharing stories, helping each other heal. Mrs. Rivera got some of her money back, enough to rent a new place. Joe started volunteering, warning folks about medical scams. Betty planted a garden in her husband's memory. Me. I kept walking every morning, hugging my grandkids a little tighter, thanking God I was still here. This whole mess taught me something. Trust is precious, but you've got to question it sometimes. I'd always seen doctors as heroes, but Hayes showed me they're just people and people can fail you. I learned to listen to my gut, to fight for what's right, even when it's hard. Linda says I'm stubborn as a mule, but that stubbornness brought a conman to justice. I hope my story makes you think twice, maybe check those test results, ask for that second opinion. You never know who's looking out for you or who's looking to cash in. If this story hit home for you, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear another story like mine, click the box on the left. Dr. Richard Hayes was done for, his license gone, his face all over the news, locked up after a guilty verdict that shook Springfield to its core. But even with him behind bars, I couldn't just walk away and call it a day. The pain he'd caused me, my family, and so many others lingered like a bruise that wouldn't fade. My name's Frank, 69 years old, and this is how I closed the book on the doctor who lied to me about having cancer, how it changed my life, and what I learned about trust, truth, and fighting for what's right. After the trial, where Hayes got 15 years for fraud and racketeering, I thought I'd feel lighter, like I could finally breathe. But it wasn't that simple. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those nights I spent thinking I was dying, Linda crying herself to sleep, my kids looking at me like I was already half gone. That kind of hurt doesn't just vanish because the bad guy's in jail. But seeing Hayes pay, knowing he couldn't hurt anyone else, gave me a piece of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. The weeks after the verdict were a whirlwind. The Springfield news leader kept the story alive, running follow-ups about the victims, the scam, and how Hayes had preyed on folks for years. More people came forward, over 100 by the end, each with a story that hit me like a punch to the gut. There was Mrs. Carter, a retired teacher who'd sold her car to pay for fake treatments. Mr. Jenkins, a widower who'd gone through chemo for a cancer he didn't have. And Sarah, a single mom who'd taken out loans for radiation that was never needed. Their stories made me realize how deep this went, how many lives Hayes had turned upside down. The lawsuit we'd filed, me and the other victims, started paying off. The judge ordered restitution, millions to be split among us. It wasn't enough to erase the pain, but it helped folks like Mrs. Rivera, who'd lost her house, start over. She moved into a small apartment, even planted flowers on her balcony, something she hadn't done in years. Joe, the retired mechanic, used his share to pay off his debts and started speaking at community centers about medical scams, warning folks to double-check their doctors. Betty, whose husband died thinking he was sick, set up a memorial fund in his name, helping families afford second opinions. Watching them rebuild felt like a small victory, like we were taking back what Hayes stole. Linda and I got a chunk of the settlement, too, enough to fix up the house and take the grandkids on a trip to the Ozarks. But for me, the real win wasn't the money. It was knowing Hayes was locked away, his lake house sold, his fancy Cadillac repossessed, his name dragged through the mud. I heard he was struggling in prison, no longer the big shot doc, just another guy in an orange jumpsuit. Part of me wanted to feel bad for him, but then I'd remember the fear in Linda's eyes, the letters I wrote to my grandkids, and any pity dried up real quick. I started a support group at our church, meeting in the basement over coffee and donuts. It was me, Joe, Betty, Carl, and a dozen others, all victims of haze. We'd sit around folding chairs, sharing what we'd been through, sometimes crying, sometimes laughing at how we'd all trusted the same snake. It wasn't just about venting. It was about healing, rebuilding trust in each other when haze had shattered it. I'd look around that room, see folks smiling again, and feel like we were stitching ourselves back together, one story at a time. The group grew, and we started inviting doctors and lawyers to talk, teaching us how to spot scams, how to ask the right questions. It felt good to turn our pain into something useful. I also got closer to my family through all this. Mike, my son, said he was proud of me, said I was like a detective in one of his old cop shows. Sarah, my daughter, started calling every week, not just when she was worried. The grandkids would crawl into my lap asking about the bad doctor, and I'd tell them a softer version, leaving out the worst parts. Linda and I grew stronger too. She'd been my rock, but now we talked more about the big stuff: life, trust, what really matters. One night on our porch swing, she said, "Frank, you didn't just save yourself. You saved a lot of people." I didn't know what to say, just held her hand and watched the stars. This whole mess changed me. I used to think doctors were untouchable, like they had all the answers. Hayes showed me they're just people, some good, some rotten. I learned to trust my gut, to question things that don't feel right. I started reading up on my health, asking for copies of my tests, getting second opinions even when I didn't need to. I told my kids to do the same, to never take anyone's word as gospel, no matter how many diplomas they've got on their wall. I also learned how strong I could be. Linda calls me stubborn as a mule, and maybe she's right, but that stubbornness brought down a conman. I think about the what if sometimes. What if I hadn't questioned Hayes? What if I'd gone through with the chemo? It's a dark road to go down, but it reminds me why I fought. I wanted to protect my family, my town, anyone who might have walked into Hayes' office next. Looking back, I'm proud of what we did, but it came at a cost. I still get jumpy when the phone rings, half expecting bad news. I see the worry in Linda's eyes sometimes, like she's waiting for the other shoe to drop. But we're moving forward. I walk every morning, same as always, feeling the sun on my face, grateful for every day I wasn't supposed to have. I hug my grandkids tighter, take Linda out for ice cream like we're kids again, and thank God I'm still here. If there's one thing I hope you take from my story, it's this: don't let trust blind you. Ask questions, check the facts, fight for the truth. You never know who's looking out for you or who's looking to cash in on your fear. If this story meant something to you, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and drop your thoughts in the comments. To hear another story like this, check out the link on the left.